So, I told myself I wouldn't make videos like this anymore. Videos where I give my opinion on video games, but I had a good reason to make this one. Over the past couple of days, I've been gathering gameplay footage for an Arc Raiders guide I was planning to make on my newbie flavor channel. In this guide, I was going to talk about some tips and tricks that you may not have known. I was going to talk about how compensators are better than silencers for high damage semi-auto weapons. I was going to talk about fruit mix being an overpowered medical item. I was going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff that honestly wasn't that surprising. And what I mean by that is anyone who's played the game for more than about 10 hours could have probably figured out these tips and tricks. So I asked myself, was the guide I was making just not that deep? Was I not providing the most obscure tips and tricks like I was promising? And the more I thought about it, the more I pondered whether or not the guide I was making was insightful enough to become a guide. The more I realized, holy shit, this game isn't really that deep. In fact, it's barely even a game. You see, I started making videos because I wanted to talk about a little game I used to play a lot called Rust. And in my first few videos, I talked around a single point that I never really stated exclusively about both this game and that game. And that point I kept talking around was this. This game isn't really even a game. It's just a grind. Now, before you start furiously typing how it's not meant for someone like me, or how I'm just nostalgic for how things used to be, let me say that if you're enjoying Arc Raiders or Rust or any game that is of similar experience, I want you to know that I hope you're enjoying it. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart when I say I really want you to enjoy yourself, and I hope you're proud of the time you're spending experiencing this amazing project by these very creative and hardworking developers. But my God, I cannot be the only one that is thinking, when does this game start? Like I said before, I've given my opinions on Rust and why I thought the developers of that game were sanitizing the experience, but every single month, it seems like the majority of new games in the shooter space are becoming more and more of a grind and less of a game. I'm going to break down a few things about the game specifically that might illustrate this sentiment I'd like to express to you. First, let's look at how a game is defined. Google defines a game as a form of play or sport, especially a competitive one played according to rules and decided by skill, strength, or luck. Okay then, well, if we take a look at the different systems within Arc Raiders, we can analyze each one using this definition of a game as a reference for good game design, and we can vaguely determine how much of Arc Raiders is a grind and how much of it is actually a game. Being that I'd like to give things a fair try before I form an opinion, and I'd like to state that I've played this game for a little over 300 hours at the making of this video, and I understand that results may vary wildly for every individual who plays the game, and my attempt to formulate this video is based primarily off of my own anecdotal experience. But with that being understood, I will try to remain as fair and unbiased as much as one human can be. What are the systems that come to mind when you think of a game like Arc Raiders? You're probably thinking PvP, PvE, looting, some form of extraction/survival, and shooting. Remember the definition from earlier? We're going to hold each of these systems to that definition as a standard of good game design. Let's start with the PvP. Does the general system of Arc Raiders PvP hold to the standard definition of a form of play or sport that is decided by skill, strength, or luck? Yes, I would say it does, but how much is the real question? Well, most teamfights are won by a combination of gear and positioning. Even utility items like grenades and traps like jolt mines can completely turn a fight, so is it really skill, strength, or luck based? Not really. Anyone can buy decently powered utility and weapon items, and most players can get good blueprints within a week. So when I think about the PvP aspect of the game, and when I was making my guide earlier, I caught myself asking the same question. When does the game part start? So then I think to myself, okay, maybe the game part starts when the PvE systems kick in. Maybe I'm just being too nitpicky and judgmental about the developers, and I'm still sour about what happened with Rust all those years ago. So does the PvE system hold true to good game design? Does this form of play lean into a system that is decided by skill, strength, or luck? Well, again, not really. The AI doesn't seem to feel very difficult, and most of them can be beaten with a pharaoh and something to hide behind. Even the current strongest AI, the matriarch, can be beaten by a few players who are just hiding in a building and shooting it with high-powered weapons. Almost all of the aerial drones can be disengaged by hiding from their line of sight. Even the Rocketeer isn't that bad as long as you've got something large enough to cover your body with. So again, the question creeps back in. When is the game gonna start? Because so far, it feels like I'm just killing robots to kill players, and then killing players to kill more players and more robots. When am I gonna feel like I'm learning something or searching for a greater purpose or skill that isn't just a fictional world that seems like it's just being added to add long-term interest in the game? Sorry, I know I said I'd be as unbiased as possible, but I can't be the only one thinking it, right? Anyways, I think you see where I'm going with this. So going back to the guide I told you I was making for my other channel, most of the tips and tricks for that guide had to do with the looting and the extraction/survival aspects of the game. Surely those held to the definition of what a game is supposed to be, right? Actually, yes. If we look at the definition again, a form of player sport, especially a competitive one, played according to the rules and decided by skill, strength, or luck. A lot of the looting system is luck-based, and the items and blueprints you find are mostly RNG-based. Kind of. Most areas spawn the same type of items and loot with the exception of limited time map conditions and events. And extracts can be luck-based based on those same map conditions, but for the most part, the map layout is generally the same, and the way in which you extract is also the same. All of them use the same push button and get out method or raider hatch key with little variation to the system. So, like I said before, a person with about 10 hours will probably understand this as well, and once they do, they're likely asking the same question I've been asking myself for the past 300-ish hours. When does the game part start? Because this grind just doesn't seem to be ending. I intentionally left the shooter aspect of the game for last because it relates to the game I mentioned I used to play before this, which is Rust. Again, the point I've been wanting to make about Rust is the point I want to make now, and that's that both games aren't really games by the standard definition of what a game is, at least not in the way you'd expect the shooter part of each game to be. Both of the games have aim cone, also known as weapon bloom, and both games suffer from the same issue regarding gunplay. Both games suffer from a player base that doesn't want to use better gear in raids. You might catch the odd person using a really good gun, but how often do you actually see it? I'd bet my last dollar that you haven't come across more than one team's worth of players in-game where the entire team had epic tier everything in a game that wasn't the matriarch or queen event in your most recent 5 normal map games. You just don't see it. And you want to know why you probably don't see it? It's because this isn't a game. This is a grind. If we ask ourselves the defining question on whether the shooter aspect of the game is, well, actually a game, you could make the argument that it takes a little bit of skill to aim in game, but you're not really punished for moving or being shot at. So is aiming really that much of a challenge to overcome? Not really. You could kind of make the argument that stronger guns usually win, but again, not really. Because I don't know if you've tried using any of them, but they aren't that much stronger than any level 4 common weapon or just a level 1 Venator. So no, you don't really feel like you're gaming like a true gamer when you get better guns. If anything, the real feel of gaming happens when you shoot the gun and the luck-based aim cone makes you think you're shooting at someone. So, in a weird twisted way, the shooter aspect of the game is the most gamified, but it's also the least enjoyable because no one wants to use a better gun because why? It's not worth it. There's no skill to learn, there's no greater purpose for the weapon to serve, there's no well-geared, formidable players that require you to use better gear or more strategy. There's no game. There's just the grind. Which brings me back to the guide I told you I was making. Does the game even really need a guide? Why even play in the first place? Because after about 15 to 30 hours, you can experience pretty much everything this game has to offer. You could watch someone play for 5 hours and probably experience the majority of the game if the person you're watching is far enough in. And it kind of saddens me because the developers of this game and almost every game in the shooter space is sort of heading down this same path. They all seem to be using the same formula. Pitch their game as a unique game experience that is really just a catered grinding match with shallow game mechanics and maybe a story to go with it. But the story isn't really there to intrigue you, it's to keep you coming back to check out the game. Sorry, I meant grind. They want you to keep grinding. I know I'm late to the party and maybe I'm just beating a dead horse, but when they said this game wasn't for everyone, did they mean it wasn't for gamers? And by gamers, I don't mean someone who experiences and interacts in a virtual environment on an electronic device. I mean people who enjoy learning complex systems and mastering mechanical, technical, and fundamental strategies in immersive and intriguing worlds. Because it doesn't seem like they made this game for those people, but they pitched it like they did. Anyways, if you're enjoying this game, like I said before, I'm really happy for you, but I find it dishonest the way the team over at Embark have marketed this game. I find it disingenuous that the players who defend the game say it's meant for PvPers, but then never actually engage at the highest levels of PvP with gear that is actually supposed to make the game more interesting and worthwhile. And I find it not worth my time, if I'm honest. After 300 hours, I can give a reasonable review and say that this game was not as intriguing as other people have said it was. I'm not going to say I didn't enjoy some of it, but to say that this game was even remotely close to fun would miss farther than an anvil at long range. What I found is that this game has a lot of fun if conditions. This game can be fun if you're playing with friends. This game can be fun if you're a content creator. This game can be fun if you like to interact with randoms in unique ways, which does happen quite a bit. And this game can be fun if you don't look at it like a serious game, but rather like a grind. Just have fun and don't take it seriously, because maybe that's where I went wrong. At the end of the day, I guess that's all games are supposed to be. A fun grind.